could you tell me what day it is today, or should I say, what date is it today? As of course, the year. Why, my friend, it is the 4th of February 2025. How many videos has I Enjoy Stuff posted this year? 1. Surely he's done some shorts. None. No, you're joking. You're joking, aren't you? You're funny. Oh, you're really not joking? It's fine. It's fine. Hello everybody, welcome back to another I Enjoy Stuff video. In this one it's going to be geography related. So we are going to be talking about borders. Borders. They are very interesting things that are decided for many different reasons. There can be many different causes for those borders, such as geological boundaries, economical boundaries, and many more, including some border disputes we will discuss today. So let's get into the video. First section I want to talk about is river borders. Now these are very common. A good example, perhaps, could be the border between England and Scotland, the border between Croatia and Serbia. These follow rivers. The reason behind this is because the governments of each nation have decided there is a river that equally divides our land masses to some degree, or there is a river that satisfies both sides to use as a border, and therefore you often see very squiggly and not so straight borders. Now these happen a lot, especially in places that have often not been interfered with by foreign powers in the past, but it can still be a case that something else happens there, but most of the time it is countries that have not faced much interference with foreign nations in the past with a lot of power. Because these river borders, of course, are a choice of both of the governments at that time, and sometimes, for example, when empires took over countries and eventually let them be independent, they would usually choose the borders of those countries, sometimes to deny disputes. So there is often a scenario where these river borders are in places where it bears a striking resemblance, actually, to the fact that they have not been invaded often in the previous past, of course. So river borders are quite interesting. Now, the river does really decide the border, but something interesting is, what if somebody changed the river border? That is a good question to ask, because a very notable situation here is a border dispute that is still continuing between Croatia and Serbia, where they have split a line down the Danube River, which is a river in Eastern to Central Europe, which is quite long, significantly long actually, and around the Croatia-Serbia border it does meander quite a bit. But in the past, they had slightly changed the course of the river, therefore Serbia are suggesting that therefore the river that was modified should be the border, while Croatia suggests that the original river should be the border between Serbia and Croatia, causing some places where absolutely nobody claims it, because therefore their claim would be retracted on the other end for another site. A good example of this is Beer to Will, which we will cover later in the video. So, in summary, river borders are quite meandering, and they often don't follow a very straight line path. They often are caused by governments coming together of nations that have not been colonised previously in the past for a long time, being part of an empire, of course, which therefore meant that instead of the people who had originally taken control of those countries, changing the borders and making them how they would want, it is the government of those countries which have decided on the borders of that. Say if you looked at Google Maps, it would not... The border of Egypt and Libya and the border of Scotland and England look very different, because one follows a river while another follows a straight line that had been drawn in the past. So it's quite interesting to look at that. So, with that being said, let's get into the next segment of the video. Next part of the video is economical / cultural borders. Now, these can happen, and it's not so often that they happen, but they happen when a country's government, again, or the people who run the democracy, or in some sorts, want cultural boundaries and borders, which in effect create the border being between two cultures, two economical powers, to even it out. For example, if there was a city, not many countries would want to split the city between two countries. They would want it to be in one country, whereas maybe another city would go into the country that neighbours them. Because if there are two countries on a line, then by that means, when there are two cities on a line, which therefore would mean that two countries, for example, can't decide, where to put their border. For example, they may want a straight border, but it cuts through both of the cities. So, what they would do usually instead for something like this is they would give one city to one country and give it to another. Or in some cases, which would be highly controversial sometimes, one country would take both of the cities. Now, this is simply because splitting a country's cities could be very unwelcoming. For example, imagine two countries have very different laws, and they could be very strict and very obscure, and therefore you could be on one side of a street, and on the other side of the street you could be breaking a law that you don't know you're breaking. Or, for other instances, it could be a division. It could be classed as a division, and eventually people over time would develop different cultures on other sides of the borders, because it is an often situation of it would almost seem like separation, which would in the long term cause a boundary that would eventually be set. Therefore, these boundaries are usually set like this, and it usually also means the boundary is not straight. A city usually grows outwards in many different directions to many different levels, which therefore means it is very hard to find a city that has completely straight lines. It's completely square. It's almost impossible to find. So, therefore, these borders usually exist like this. Now, there could be other reasons. There could be facts that there are certain parts of land that another country wants more than another, or, for example, they have a debate, a dispute, but therefore the land that they want to get is something that is more than the other country wants to get. So it's a quite interesting one, I do think. But in summary, it can usually be caused when cities and cultures almost effectively split between two countries and people are not happy about it, so therefore there is a line which shows that those cities are separate from the other countries, therefore basically meaning that there is not a divide where a city splits through two countries, because it's very rare that that is seen on a map. Into the next segment. The next segment is going to be about mountain borders. Now, this is quite an interesting one that also adds on to the rivers borders that we mentioned before, because mountains are also geographical, just like rivers. So, what we need to know is, what defines a mountain border? Well, a mountain border is a border between two countries that has an area that is mountainous and it is split across the mountainous terrain. The border is. Now, the reason why we need to classify that the mountainous terrain fills up relatively a large portion of the border and is split across the mountainous line, what basically in effect would mean that the country's border is between mountains. So, by that, there are very few examples of this, but there are some that stand out in particular. One is Nepal and China, and that is the Himalayan mountain range, as you may know, famously housing the world's tallest mountain, Mount Everest. Well, of course on land, because the world's tallest mountain, including underwater depth, is Mauna Kea in Hawaii. But the world's largest mountain on land fully, Mount Everest, is housed there. And another example is the Alps between Italy and Austria, Italy and Switzerland, and Italy and France. Now, most notable of this is the Matterhorn between Switzerland and Italy. Now, it is split right on the peak between Italy and Switzerland, and the Alps mountain range is also a part of this. Now, these do not involve any parliamentary discussions as such. In some way they do, because the Parliament did need to decide, of course, that would be the border path, because that sufficed for both sides of the deal, which therefore would mean that both sides were satisfied with the borders. And with mountainous borders, it really is quite an interesting one. Now, this is because mountainous borders are not borders you can cross easily, by obvious means. It is mountainous borders for a reason. You need to climb the mountain to get over the border. Now, these borders can be used for more than just an interesting looking border. It can be used for defence, for instance. Let's say there is a country A and country B, and country A wants to defend from country B, which is trying to attack it. Country A and country B have a border, which is a mountain range. Therefore, country B needs to hire its expert mountaineers and train them to attack country A, and that is very hard. So therefore, country A is very, very safe from country B. So it can be a military advantage, but not very often, because it is usually just the border between two countries and it has a strategical advantage. However, there are other examples such as Germany and Switzerland, France and Switzerland, Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and Austria and Liechtenstein, and many more different types. Anyway, on to the final segment of the video. Final segment is going to be about colonial borders, and I saved beer to Will for this one, so stay tuned, I suppose, if that's what you want me to say, I guess. So, these borders are particularly interesting ones because they are very common, but also very rare in a way, because yes, there are a lot of these borders, but only a few countries have caused these borders to be in existence. See, often the reason is for these borders, these straight line borders, often, but sometimes different lines, but usually straight lines. Especially if it's a British previous colonial territory, then it will often be straight lines, such as areas in Africa and the Middle East, for example. Now, this is quite interesting because this is actually caused by when the country declares independence from the country that colonised it and, of course, took control of it, entered it into its empire. As soon as the acceptance of independence from the country that was originally controlling it is passed, then back a while ago, when all of the decolonisation and independence of other countries was happening, what often would happen is the colonial country would give the country that it was setting independent, what it would do is it would give specific borders that it would draw between it and another country, usually that would also be a colonial territory that had recently got independence or was going to get independence. And what this effectively would do is it would often do, as we said earlier, separate cultural boundaries very badly, occasionally. And therefore it's also led to a lot of disputes. Another thing I will say, I am going to mention Beta Whale, especially for this final part of the video. And that is going to be the fact that Beta Whale is a disputed land area between Egypt and Sudan, and the reason behind this is there is this triangle near the Egyptian coast, and it's a small triangle that is filled with incredibly valuable resources that Egypt and Sudan share in a disputed area. They basically share parts of the triangle. However, there is a piece of land that, if claimed by either Egypt or Sudan, they would have to give away their part of the Halaib triangle, so therefore nobody wants it. They are continuously disputing, letting each other have it, but nobody wants it. Therefore, it is terra nullius. It is absent. It is not a country. It is not controlled by any country. It is small. It is very barren. It is a strip of wasteland in between Egypt and Sudan in the vast Sahara Desert. Nobody has claimed it so far, officially, and therefore it is very interesting because it's not a large place of land, but it has no significance whatsoever compared to the Halaib Triangle. Therefore, nobody is taking it, and it is a continuous border dispute that I do like to mention because it's quite fascinating. There are many more of these, though. One more example I would like to say, completely irrelevant to this right now, but it has been resolved now. It was an island called Hans Island between Greenland and Canada. Greenland is a part of Denmark. Canada is Canada. So, Canada borders one country. Denmark borders one country. Canada borders the USA. Denmark borders Germany. So, there was this island called Hans Island that was being disputed. It was a completely resourceless, meaningless, yet important strategic island in between Greenland and Canada. It has since been split in half, and to the point where Greenland and, Denmark and Canada both share the island, which in turn does mean that they now border each other, therefore each of them now has 2 borders. So the list of countries with only 1 border is getting shorter and shorter. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Probably in a month or something, because my upload schedule is absolutely disgusting. Goodbye!